There's no hill we can't climb. There's no mountain too high for us now. There's no reason to hide.
Hi guys, welcome to Abuse Recovery Success. I am very excited to have a guest with us today that does his own amazing podcast and is just a really great part of the sober community. So without further ado, I've got Brett Morris, a recovering addict and a podcast host. Welcome to Abuse Recovery Success, Brett.
Thank you so much. I'm so honored to be on the show today and get to share part of my journey and hopefully share some of that experience and strength and hope with your listeners.
Well, I'm excited too. I mean, first and foremost, you already have just such a great energy about you. And second of all, me and my team were super impressed by what you're doing to shatter the stigmas around addiction. So, the point of this podcast is for us to share our journey, what we've been through, to the listeners that are out there struggling or in their own journey with recovery. This podcast is also for those survivors of trauma. I'm a survivor of childhood trauma, and occasionally, addiction and trauma can go hand in hand. So what I want to do today is, Brett, have you share your story, your personal journey in recovery with the listeners, and then, we'll talk together and see where the story takes us.
Perfect. I'll go ahead and jump right in.
Okay.
So my journey of addiction began, I would say, like a lot of people in high school, just trying to fit in, wanting to feel a part of, and, going to parties and drinking beers and smoking weed with people from school and from work and whatever. And, I kind of found like my people, I found my group, I found that sense of belonging. And it wasn't until a little later, once I had moved out of my parents' house and started going to college, that the experimentation with other substances really started to begin. And that's, I guess for me, that's kind of where the fun stopped and the misery and pain really started to begin. As I started out doing like some party drugs and doing like, acid and ecstasy and just kind of whatever I could find. And eventually I got to a point where I was doing meth for, oh man, I don't even know how long I was using meth for, but that was kind of, that was kind of like the dive into the deep end for me. Like my life really became unmanageable. My life got out of control really quickly when I got into that world of meth use. And, then that's when some of the crazy behavior started. That's when, started losing jobs and losing friends and, really started to not really care about myself and what my life was like. It became all encompassing to, it talks about in like the NA literature, it says that, we live to use and use to live. Like that was truly what my life had become. My entire life revolved around getting high. Sorry, I lost my train of thought there for a second. I got a cat over here in the corner that's making
Those
noise.
dang cats, you know what?
Yeah.
They do it to you.
Man, I know. I feel
Well, but I want to hear
apologize.
more about that need to use to live, because I think that's the darkness we all know.
Yeah, absolutely. It just became, it was almost like I couldn't remember what it was like before I was using. I couldn't remember how to function without getting high. I couldn't remember how to get out of bed without picking up the pipe. I couldn't go to work without getting high. I couldn't be in any kind of social situation without getting high, because I didn't have that self-confidence to be myself without the aid of some other stimulant to make me feel that confidence and really be able to be around people, or at least that's what I thought in my mind. So it really did become my way of life, where every activity, everything I did revolved around getting high. It was either getting more dope. It was getting high before I went to do an activity. Like it just became my world. So I'll fast forward a little bit down the road a little ways, because I know you said to kind of try to give just like a screenshot of what my active addiction looked like. So fast forward a couple years into my meth use, and I'd seen the unmanageability of my life. I'd seen, just how I got to that point where I was done. I didn't want to use anymore. I didn't know how to stop. I wasn't familiar with 12-step fellowships or anything like that. And I definitely couldn't afford to go to rehab or anything of that sort, because I'd spent every penny I had to get the next one. And I remember calling my sister and just breaking down on the phone with her and telling her what was going on, letting her know, like, hey, I've been using meth, like I'm in a bad spot. I hadn't talked to her probably 6 months, a year. Um, and she said that I could come sleep on her couch and figure things out. So that's what I did, because I was at the time I was living with my meth dealer,
Mm.
so I had real easy access to to my drug of choice. So I moved in with my sister, and I wasn't working any kind of program. I wasn't implementing any kind of spiritual principles in my life. I had no structure. Um, and so I started substituting. I started drinking to fill that void of the drug use. um, and it didn't take long before that became unmanageable. And I ended up, let's see, it was probably 6 8 weeks after I had stopped using meth. And I went on my dinner break. Um, and I went to a bar down the street and was doing shots instead of instead of eating like I should have been. And um, I was driving back to work, and I passed out while I was driving, and I ended up sideswiping three parked cars, and ran up through somebody's front yard and parked in their living room. And that was kind of the real beginning of my journey into sobriety, into finding a 12-step program, into this new way of life. And it wasn't how I had planned on doing it. But it was a stipulation of my probation that I had to go to, I think it was 3 meetings a week, and I had all these different classes through the court that I had to take. And that was really my first introduction to a 12-step program. And I can't say that I did it perfectly. I did have some relapses, and it took me a little while to get on board with like some of the ideas in the 12-step program. And it was really foreign and strange, and it was something completely different from what I was used to. But looking back on it now, like, I'm so grateful that I got arrested. I'm so grateful that I spent a little bit of time in jail and had that nudge from the judge to get into a 12-step fellowship, because my life today is completely 180 from what it was before. Today I'm a productive member of society. I've gotten married. I have a 5-month-old daughter. I have a career that I really enjoy. Like, there's just so many benefits to recovery. I have friendships today where I can be myself, where I can be vulnerable and be honest and let people know, not just like the surface level BS. Like, they know who I am. They know my struggles. They know my victories. Like, we have this tight knit community. And I'm so grateful for that, because before, I probably couldn't have told you, but one of the things that I really deep down wanted was that connection with other people, and I didn't know how to find that.
Wow. That is such a good story, like, honestly. And I'm like the happy ending. So I love, that you have a 5-month-old, and I want to hear more about your life now. But I guess before we really talk about that, I kind of want to know more about, like, when you were living with the meth dealer, like, how did that happen? Like, how did you get the invite? How long did you stay? Tell us more.
Well, it wasn't an intentional thing. I had been using meth for a few months, and my current living situation, I had two roommates, and the house we were in, the lady that owned it was going to sell it. So we ended up kind of going our separate ways. And uh, my my one of my roommates was trying to help me find a place to live, and she found this guy that had a room for rent. And we had several mutual friends on Facebook, and it just kind of fell into place
Mm.
that he just so he didn't tell me right off the bat, like, I do drugs,
Yeah.
and I'm a dealer. um like I went over and hung out with him and had a couple beers and smoked a joint, and like we had a good time, and I was like, yeah, this seems like a good fit. Like I think we could be roommates. And then I moved in and very quickly figured out what was going on there.
Hmm.
Uh, and it just so happened that it was like, oh man, you have exactly what I'm looking for. So that really helped like feed that addiction. It
Hmm.
really helped like fuel it to be like, I want to get high. I'm just going to walk down the hall and get some, instead of having to like go find it or go to a sketchy part of town. Well, I was living in the sketchy part of town, but
I love it. Well, because one of my questions I often ask people is like, what was your darkest moment, And I know that earlier you were referencing, that car accident, which was absolutely, I'm sure, dark and scary and not good. But what, like, because I imagine it was a dark time when you're using the meth and it's getting heavier and heavier and you're living in that environment. Like, but you have to tell us, like, what was the darkest moment or chain of darkest moments?
Man, that's a tough question. I honestly, I think the darkest moment was it was right before I'd called my sister. I had been awake for I don't know 4 or 5 days straight, and I'd finally fallen asleep. I had come down enough that I could sleep, and I had a dream. And in the dream, it was like a third person view of my funeral. And the only people that were in attendance were my mom, my dad, and my sister, and the minister that was doing the service. And I remember thinking, like, man, where are all my friends at? Why did no one come to my funeral? Like,
Yeah.
doesn't anybody care that I'm gone? And and then it was almost like a movie. Like they zoomed in on my family sitting there on the front row, and they're like whispering through the service, like all these terrible things about me. Like I can't like I'm glad he's gone, and he was such a terrible person, and all he did was take, and I'm glad that he's not here anymore. And I remember waking up from that dream and thinking, like, man, I don't want that to be my legacy. Like I don't want to leave this earth, and the few people that care enough to show up to my funeral are talking about how glad they are that I'm not here anymore. So that was kind of a dark thing. Like obviously it didn't
Yeah.
happen, but that was like for whatever
Yeah.
reason that like clicked, like, man, my life is not I'm not in a good place. Like I'm not where I want to be. Like I was raised in a good home. I was raised with two loving parents, and like the middle class suburban dream. And like it was almost one of those things, like I felt like I knew better. Like I know that this isn't the life that I'm supposed to live, but I didn't know any other way at that point.
Yeah. You mentioned earlier that when you reached out to your sister, that it had been a while since you had talked to her, 6 months, a year, and she was still willing to let you in. Tell the listeners a little bit about like what the state of your relationships when you're in that active addiction, and
Mm.
what it was like.
Oh man, that's a whole nother piece that I didn't even touch on, that I feel like adds like a whole nother twist to my
Mm-hmm.
crazy story. And I don't know how I left this out. At the time when I was using, my dad was actually an undercover police officer,
Mm.
and he was an undercover cop for, oh man, like 15 years or something. So he was an undercover cop the entire time I was using. So pretty early on in my using, after I had moved out, I had gone to some kind of family function. I want to say it was Thanksgiving dinner, maybe. And my dad called me out. Like he pulled me aside, and he said, I know you're high. I know you're using. Like he pulled me off his car insurance, his life insurance. Like he let me know that like I still love you. You're still welcome to come around, but like, I'm not going to support you. I'm not going to do anything to help you. I'm not going to do anything to make your life or your using easier. And so that was kind of it for me. Like as soon as somebody would do something to like let me know that they knew I was using, or they didn't approve of my behavior, it was like, you're cut out of my life. Like you don't exist anymore, because you're going to try to stop me from doing what I love, and that's getting high. So it's like you're done. I'm done with you. Like I'll find somebody else to try to get money from, or to help me in whatever way I need.
Yeah. Wow. So what are those relationships like now? What have they improved? Tell us about that, cuz I know you said you're living the good life now.
Yeah, absolutely. Today those relationships have been restored, and I think that that's only because of the recovery process and learning about myself and learning to apply spiritual principles in my life and working on that living amends of like showing them through my actions, not just through my words, that I'm a different person today. I spend a lot of time with my dad now. He and I hang out once or twice a week. We have a good relationship. I have a great relationship with my sister today. Uh, you know, I talked to her this morning.
Mhm.
Those relationships have been restored, and today that's one of the most important things that I have in my life. That's one of the things that I hold most dear is those relationships with family, because we don't get to pick our family, but at the same time, like we don't like we that's some like we're family, we're blood. Like that's something that I cherish today, and I'm so grateful that those relationships have been restored. And I feel so bad for some of those things that I did in the past that I know that hurt them. And but it's like that double-edged sword. It's like I feel that guilt and that shame, but at the same time I know that there's nothing I can do to
Mhm.
change the past, but I can try to make up for that
Mhm.
today in the present by trying to be a good and decent person and
Mhm.
do the right thing now.
Yeah, well, they say we won't shut the door on our past,
Hmm.
and it's something we can use to build upon. And living amends is, where it's all at. And I think the importance of letting the listeners know that, like, you too can restore those relationships. Like, you too can have that part of your life improve, be better. And that it's not just Brett or myself sitting here living, picture perfect lives. We're still dealing with life. And relationships will always have their ups and downs, but me and him get to show up for those relationships and put our best foot forward like we couldn't when we were in active addiction. And I too let people down left and right. I one of the things that keeps me sober now is I will never forget how people used to look at me with this look of pity yet disdain and just it's almost a look you can't even put into words. But I remember seeing people and in my life look at me like that. And today no one looks at me like that. Today no one looks at me like that. And I stay strong in my sobriety every single day to avoid having that look ever again because I got a better life. What would you tell someone? Because your podcast is about shattering stigmas, much like mine is. So, what would you tell someone that's either in active addiction or trying to get sober right now, or just got sober and feeling the weight of the stigma and the shame? What would you tell them right now?
That's a great question, and I think it kind of ties back into what we were just talking about, and a point that I didn't make. None of this happens overnight. We don't get sober, we don't get clean, and then like a week later, all of a sudden, our parents or our family trusts us again. Like this is a
Mm.
ongoing process. But for anybody that's still using or thinking about giving this recovery thing a shot, like I would just say, give yourself a break, give it a try. It's one of the best. It's the best thing I've ever done in my life. If I could, I wish I could have done it sooner. I wish I could have, been more open minded and tried it a lot sooner, because I came in with such a closed mind and didn't think it was possible to live without getting high. And man, just the miracles and the blessings and all these great things that have happened in my life, I know are a direct result of me not getting high. And today I don't wake up and feel that pain and misery and the guilt and shame and all those negative things that I felt when I was using. I heard somebody describe it the other day, and the analogy made perfect sense. They described using as putting your pain, like pain. How do they say it? They described it as like paying for something with a credit card. Like getting high is that credit card. It takes away that pain, but then eventually that payment's going to come due, and it's going to come due with interest at some point. Like I'm going to have to face those feelings. I'm going to have to face that pain, and you know it's difficult, especially in the beginning, like those early days when you start to have the feelings again and you start to have to deal with those emotions. But you know, emotions have never killed anybody. Like those feelings have never
Mm,
killed anybody. And it's tough to get through it. It's tough when you're in the middle of getting through those
mhm.
feelings and emotions and stuff. But you know, the peace and serenity and all the beauty that's on the other side of that is so worth it. Like it's such an amazing way of life. Like it's so hard to put it into
Yeah.
words.
Well,
Yeah.
Brett, like I relate to what you're saying, like all the emotions. And when you're first getting sober, to me, it felt like life was just screaming at me. And I thought, what in the world is going on? I mean, I think I cried every day, but I mean, I it's exactly what you're saying. If you can get on the other side of that, if you can like hunker down, which I feel like why it's so important, it was for me at least, to just be diligent in that first 90 days, 6 months, year of just immersing myself in recovery. And that can look different for everyone. I'm in this podcast, there's no one way to get sober. For me, I did utilize AA, but I just needed a lot of immersion into the whole recovery world. And I think that's what makes podcasts like yours and mine important, what makes just having fellow people on social media in recovery that you can follow and look towards. I guess my next question would be for you, and like creating the life that you've created today and kind of working through those dark days and the initial days of sobriety. Like you said, it doesn't happen overnight. But like for those that are like, they want to kind of fantasize about what it can be like. Tell us what that beautiful 5-month-old baby and the wife and the happy family relationships. Tell us about that side of your life now.
Yeah. I would say, one of the first steps for me was I had to learn how to love myself before I could find any kind of love in my life or
Mm-hmm.
find that relationship. And if your listeners have a keen ear, they can probably hear her now crying in the background. So shout out to my baby who's crying. Um, one day, maybe I'll have a fancy studio to record in where I don't have cats and babies and all kinds of distractions going on.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but yeah, my life today is truly is a blessing. I never, honestly, the way I was living and my mindset, like I never planned to live to see my 30s. I never planned, I never planned to have a job and a retirement and like think about all these things that are down the road. I was just living that lifestyle of instant gratification and, pleasure and trying to find things that made me happy. And, it really is for me, my journey was like you said, through a 12-step fellowship. And, I agree with you that there's many pathways to recovery. And that's, something that I also talk about on my podcast as well. But it's so important just to find like that group, to find that community, to find other people that are further along that journey. And for me, that was one of the keys, was finding other men that had multiple years, that had
Mm-hmm.
that had the things that I wanted, not necessarily like the material things, but I could see in their actions and their words, like I could see the kind of character they had, and I wanted to be more like them. So I surrounded myself with the people that had what I wanted and learned what they did and did what they did. And uh, that's been my experience as to how, I've gotten to the place where I'm at today in my life is by surrounding myself with other people in recovery that have figured this thing out, or at least have gotten further along in their journey than I have.
No, that makes total sense. So tell the listeners a little bit about what makes you Brett Morris today. Like, who are you?
Oh man, who am I? I feel like that's a tough question because like I hear people answer that question and they tell you about like what their career is, or they tell you about what their hobbies are, or all these different things. And man, it's so difficult to like think about who I am as a person, and not just tell you like my titles or my what I do in my free time. Today I'm man, that's a great that's a difficult question.
Well, you're a
Because
father.
yeah, well, yeah, but I feel
Father
like
and a
that's just a
husband.
title to say like I'm a
Yeah.
father, and like yeah, I'm a father, but who am I as Brett? Who am
Mm-hmm.
I? Um, That's a really tough question. Today I'm a guy that's still trying to figure out
Who
what
you
life
are.
looks like. I'm still
Yeah.
trying to figure out who I am.
Yeah.
I was doing some step work yesterday with my
Mhm.
sponsor, and I started to see some different patterns in my life, and I was like, man, I didn't even realize some of the things that I'm doing until I put it on paper, and then I'm like connecting the dots of like I do this because then I do this, and like putting all these things together and like figuring out who I am. But yeah, like you said, I'm a father today. I'm a husband. I like to think that I'm a good employee. I like to think that I'm a good son, a good brother, and all these things are only possible because of recovery, because I couldn't be any of those things when I was using because I was still so wrapped up in that self-centeredness and that self-seeking, and I wanted to please me, and just all I could focus on was me. And today, through some step work and some spiritual principles, like I can see beyond myself, and I can sometimes be selfless and get out of myself, and help other people. And yeah, I guess that's who I am.
Well, I love who you are, Brett. I love it. And I'm happy that you were on here to share with us your story and what you're doing. I'm just happy about, who you are on social media as well, because I see your posts and they matter and it affects people. So it's not a small thing. So everything worth doing is hard. And you're going to go places, and I know that you're going to impact this community. So before we part, Brett, let the listeners know where they can find you, whether that's social media, your podcast. Share with them how to find you.
Awesome. I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to shout out the podcast. The name of the podcast is Recovery Survey. You can find it at recoverysurvey.com. Or I'm also on social media. I'm on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. And my username on all of those is Recovery Survey. If you guys are struggling or need somebody to talk to, send me a DM. I'd be more than happy to talk to you. If you're interested in being on the podcast, send me a DM. I'm just a normal guy. My podcast is a one-man show that I do out of my bedroom. So I'm not like some kind of awesome celebrity or like self-help coach or any guru or anything like that. I'm just a normal guy in recovery that bought a microphone and started talking to other people in recovery. So
And we here at Abuse Recovery Success love that. And it's not about that. And also it's good to add yet. But thank you, Brett. I appreciate you being on. Guys, to my listeners, if you're just tuning in for the first time, you can find us and catch up, binge watch on YouTube, April Hill Podcast. You can find me on TikTok and Instagram, April_the Hills. Also our website, abuserecoverysuccess.com. Thank you for tuning in. I'm sure you enjoyed Brett just as much as I did. Thanks, guys.
There's no mountain too high for us now. There's no reason to hide. Just let the stars we shine.